Melanie Hausman, and I serve as the League's liaison to the Volunteer Council. Today's session will showcase 3 examples of terrific partnerships between volunteer organizations and their home orchestras. We are joined by volunteer presidents and executive directors of the Dallas, Madison, and Amarillo Symphonies. I would like to introduce our moderator, Nancy Wrenn. Nancy brings a unique perspective to this session, having served as volunteer president of East Texas Symphony's volunteer organization, then as the orchestra's executive director for 15 years. She's also served as a member of the League's Volunteer Council. Nancy is currently vice president of East Texas Symphony Orchestra Foundation and has served as advisor to the president of the orchestra's Women's Symphony League for the past 2 years. Would you please join me in welcoming Nancy and our panelists today?
April 2023. The estimated value of a volunteer hour is $31.80. So tally up, kids. That acknowledges the value of individuals who dedicate time, talent, and energy to the symphony orchestra. Volunteers are vital resources. Historically, the League has emphasized the significance of the volunteer, affording conference time to the educating and inspiring of volunteers, from the recruiting and training to the keeping, through valuing specific skill sets and energies. In strong orchestral organizations, volunteers are effective partners of staff and trustee leadership, providing service across a broad range of activities. Volunteers promote the mission by sharing their commitment, bringing awareness to the community through their existing networks and connections in a positive ripple effect. Every member of the Symphony Orchestra family needs an understanding of the treasured commodities volunteers' resources can be, developing policies and plans that are inclusive and that use volunteer services wisely. Having felt valued as a volunteer within the League structure, then serving on the Volunteer Council, and subsequently becoming more aware of the broader symphony leadership blueprint, I developed a deep appreciation and respect of management and their challenges, realizing the exacting intricacies of balancing artistic, fiscal, and human resources. Enabled by and immersed in League management training and mentoring, coupled with my own passion for the art and science of performance, I was able to apply my social work training and experience to arts management. Having lived the transition through learned and applied knowledge, I fully appreciate the complex yet achievable outcome of collaboration, mutual respect, and clear communication within the symphony family produces a unique harmony of our spheres. Our panel today will further relay, and as we leverage volunteers, we realize it's not only complicated, it is also walking a fine line sometimes, and sometimes a tightrope.
Yeah.
Which of you wishes to begin our collaborative discussions on your experiences as a team?
Robert, do you care to?
I guess so. Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Reed. I'm Executive Director of the Madison Symphony. By the way, we do have a Texas connection here because prior to the Madison, I was in Plano, Texas, so we all have this Texas connection. But I do have to say, Madison has far better weather in the summer than Texas does. Yeah, Pittsburgh. I have been in this industry now since 1989. I started as a League Fellow. And so my perspective is not just for working with the Madison Symphony, but working with orchestras as large as the San Francisco Symphony to as small as the Corpus Christi Symphony. And so volunteers are a crucial part of our livelihood and our lifeblood. As we all know, some organizations are more challenged because the volunteer structure is different for different organizations. Some are a separate 501c3, some are part of the organization, and they all have their pluses and they all have their challenges too. And as we also know, the world of volunteerism has changed over the years. When I first started, it was a lot different than what it is today. And so how we have to adjust to the world of volunteerism has definitely been something that we have to be creative with, but it has been fun to do. And I just think, we would not be where we are if it wasn't for our volunteer corps. One of the things I can always tell people, as much as symphonies are about programs and all of those wonderful things, it's about that culture that keeps people coming back to the symphony. And I know people may disagree with me, but if it wasn't for those parties, if it wasn't for all of those things, we may not have that close-knit family that we have. And so if anyone says we don't need to do these receptions, we need to save money, we don't need to do this activity or this activity, I would say you're wrong, because all of those things really are important to keep a person part of the family, because many volunteers bring in people to the symphony family. They may start through the, a friend of a volunteer, and then they become donors themselves, and so on, so on. So those volunteers are crucial. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jenna Cabot.
Thank you, Robert. We're so glad to have him on board for 1 year. I'm the only non-Texan on this panel. We're proudly representing the Midwest, Chicago suburbs, and now Madison. Well, I digress. But I would say the key to leveraging volunteer power starts with creating relationships. So in our case, our president of our league, whoever that is for that year or two, sits on the board of our symphony. Robert, and before him, his predecessor, comes to our board meetings every month. They report and take questions. So you create a connection. And I think that's sort of the start of it, if you don't share information. I think also that one of the keys to collaboration is viewing volunteers not as just people that are either going to, host your party or, stuff an envelope, but they're brand ambassadors. So I would say if you're not using your volunteers and thinking of them as brand ambassadors and making sure that they understand your strategy and your mission, if you're an executive director, you're missing a huge opportunity, because those are people that are out in the community. And also, I think volunteers are like a Venn diagram. We're not just one thing. We're subscribers, we're often donors, we're often people that then become board members. So leverage the connection that you make with your volunteers, but really it starts with a relationship. And I think that's one thing that Robert, and I know people in this room know him, know that he's really good at, taking time to listen, ask questions, and be open if there's an issue or a problem. So that's all.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Noltemy from the Dallas Symphony, and I came to Dallas about 5.5 years ago and was absolutely stunned and thrilled with how our volunteers contribute to our organization in so many ways. We have multiple groups, and the group that this lovely lady represents is our league. And it's a group of a very large group of women. I think it's 700 this year. And they do so many things for us, but primary among them is fundraising for our education and community programs, which is huge. And we've been able to expand our programs dramatically because of the $1 million or so that they contribute to our budget every year. Very independently from us, running events and doing activities brilliantly and professionally, and it's truly amazing and such a really huge an important part of our organization. And our other volunteer groups focus more on engagement activities or volunteering at events. I think you can have all of the different groups work together. And I would say our communication and collaboration is extremely strong in order for our groups to be effective, but also for us to serve our groups effectively. It's a two-way street.
I'm sure she was shocked when she came to Dallas and met all the strong Ann Richard types in our group. So coming from Boston, I think we probably scared her for a second. But she jumped in full force and embraced it. And I think one of the biggest problems with volunteers in a symphony association would be the mindset on the volunteer side that it can be an us against them. And that is not true. It's just a myth that people conjure up if they don't get what they want. I see both sides. So the tightrope, I even said it right before you said it. And because I understand both sides, and from what I can see, that it's usually just poor communication on the volunteer side. And I'm not blaming volunteers by any means. It's just communication. If you have a question or if you have a problem, I'll just text someone. I won't go straight to Kim. Sometimes I do, and they're not problems. They're just questions. And I think communication between the volunteer and the associations are key to thriving. And I don't see it as us against them. We are a big family. When you said family, that's exactly how we feel. And it's only going to get better and better with the good relationships. And when you have a good relationship, you're more profitable, you can get more people. Sometimes at one point we had 1,400 women and a few men. It's not just they don't want to sign up. I don't know, but can't imagine why.
It's 1,100 this year.
Oh, it is 1,100. Okay.
We missed that communication.
Well,
Good morning, everyone. I'm Larry Lang, the Executive Director of the Amarillo Symphony. And we're approaching our 100th anniversary next season. And our Symphony Guild, thank you. Our Symphony Guild and Ginger have been part of our history for more than 50 years. They represent 3 to 5% of our budget in terms of bringing in dollars. That's through their fundraising efforts. They also provide a courtesy meal at every week of our rehearsals for the musicians, which is amazing. And then they run a lunch and listening program where they provide box lunches for our audience when they come to listen about the concert for that evening. So, and many, many other things, of course, for serving on the board, serving as volunteers, serving as ushers, whatever we need them to do. And we're so grateful to Ginger and her team of over 200, mostly ladies. They started allowing men last year, and I think they have one. So, but we couldn't really survive without them. They're integral to everything we do. We have a very positive relationship, and that discussion, as you mentioned, that communication is so important.
I'm Ginger Denney, and I am the president of our Symphony Guild. And this is my second year as president, and I will tell you that the relationships that we have formed with the people that are in the symphony office are absolutely integral in being successful in what we do. We could not do anything that we do on our end to support those in the symphony and their mission. That's what we feel like our job is. Our mission is to support what the symphony's mission is. And so us having a really good relationship with Larry and with other members of the symphony board and the symphony staff really allows us to try and fulfill what that mission is and to try to really connect with them. We see ourselves as not our own entity, but more of a support system for some of the things that are there. So anything we can do to help our big umbrella is what we want to do. So we have a meeting with, like I had a meeting with Larry a couple of months ago that was, okay, what do we need to do? What do you need from us? What do you see as something that we need to do better? What can we do to help support things that you're doing in the mission, especially going into our centennial celebration? How can we be a part of that? How can we help support that with volunteers, with publicity on our websites, on our Facebook pages and Instagram and all of that sort of thing? So I really do agree. I think communication and collaboration is absolutely key to being successful as a volunteer and leveraging your volunteers to do what the symphony needs them to do.
And I think also, we collaborate, but we also have to be, one of the challenges of being a volunteer is also being respectful of the staff time, especially we're a group 3 orchestra. So, we have a nice budget. We don't have a big staff. I don't know, 14, 15, that counts maybe the music librarian. But of course, when you're a volunteer, you think what you're doing is like, stop everything and help me. Well, we have one marketing director and a marketing, assistant, 3 people, yeah. So sometimes you have to remember that, that they have a day job, that it pays them, and it's getting out the season brochure, putting on concerts. And so I think that's something for volunteers, to be respectful. You want to collaborate and include, and you need their help to do things, and you depend on their help, but you have to respect their time and be respectful in how you ask them. And I'd say thank you. It goes both ways. Volunteers like to be thanked, but I think at Madison we try to always thank the staff. We include them if we're doing a program, and we mention who was on the committee. So I say thank you goes both ways.
I will also add, it goes both ways in, we have to, as the job as executive director, to bring the staff in more into the volunteer world also. So we want to make sure that our volunteers, when it comes to fundraising, we're going to make sure our development department is also meeting with the volunteers, because we want to know what all is going on and who is all being spoken with. And now our development department has a lot more to do when it comes to raising money for the various activities that the volunteers are doing. And also in marketing, we want to make sure that when the brand, what is being produced, is also going to be produced at the highest level. And then so the marketing team now has a lot more activities with the volunteer group. So it's not just these autonomous groups that are there now. We really all have to work together, because we want to make sure that there's not something that's going out that's incorrect, or there's something that's going to make the organization look bad, because as far as the public is concerned, it's one. And so we have to make sure that we are working and making sure the staff members also are not just going, it's the volunteers who have to do all of that now. So our jobs are to really make sure that we're working together.
Well, when timing is everything, which is what we've been saying, how do any of you relay or would relate to symphonies who have less staff and are unable to coordinate some staff with volunteer efforts? We have one executive director, and she has one staff in Tyler, Texas at this juncture. And that is a challenge, not to waste her time, to involve her in the right timing. And we don't have staff really to depend on.
How large is the group? Because your volunteer group is very
Well, it's
large.
500.
See, for, and I was just curious because that's impressive.
Yeah.
I think for us, we're not a large, we're a level 5, a group 5 symphony. So I think it's finding those people that are within your volunteer organization, what their strengths are, what their talents are. It could be what maybe their profession is or what their passion is. If there's someone that is a graphic designer or has knows someone who knows someone, it's all of those connections. And we know people who have those connections. And even if your town is a small town or it's a small symphony, there are people that are experts in certain areas that we can tap into those resources. And in doing that, we're including those volunteers, allowing them to share their expertise, and potentially having someone who is now a donor or a potential board member or something along those lines. Now, going back to kind of don't overuse those people, I think sometimes if you're a CPA, you're always the treasurer, you know? And so that might not be the role that they always want to be in and to be involved in. But letting them know that, hey, we could use you to, we had our marketing director, Sammy. She was amazing, and we needed some branding for the Symphony Guild for some of the things that we've done for years and years and years, and the logos have kind of changed, and we thought that's ridiculous. We need to have that branding there. And so she was able to kind of coordinate and work with us and point us in the right direction of what we needed to do and who we could go with. And now that's there in that office, so we don't have to redo that over and over and over again, so that if Larry wanted to utilize that, he could utilize that, or anyone else who comes into those roles in future times. So I think really tapping into your volunteer base and knowing what their strengths are, maybe doing a survey. I know that seems silly, but asking when they're joining or when they're renewing, what would you like to do? Are there things that, if there are needs that you know that need to be met, maybe having them check a box, like, I'm really good at this, you know, if you know that this is something that you need to do, and that helps you to get to know your volunteers and maybe what they could do to help you.
You do need to know what your skill sets are within your groups. Janet, do you have another comment about?
Nope, I think that's a good idea. I think, really, the volunteers and the symphony together, we're telling the story of our symphony. And now more than ever, it's so important to, reach beyond our hall. It's, we're beyond the days of just we wait and people come to the concert in the hall. So how I think one of the challenges for volunteers is to think a little bit differently. Volunteering has changed, the face of volunteering, but how can we do things differently? How can we really support our orchestras in being out in the community and telling the story? So I think sometimes volunteers get stuck in a mindset of we're very task-oriented. We're planning the gala and we've got our committees, but how else can we really be helping to tell the story and share what we all love?
I think that that's a really important point. Once we decided to offer our volunteer groups the opportunity to support the education and community programs, then that was a really good focus point for them to be able to talk about those programs, and we would have some of the teachers and the students come and play for them, and they'd get a chance to meet them, and then they really could be such an incredible ambassador in addition to everything else that they did, because they really understood and had a personal connection with the people involved who are benefiting from a lot of the fundraising that was being done. And I think that that was really a pivotal point where I saw the level of engagement on a regular basis increase, and I think Marena can speak a little bit more to that.
I agree. That really helped, and it gave it more of a mission-driven thing to do. The other thing is that there's always someone there from the Symphony Association at any function that the league has, and that's hard to do. And a lot of the time it's Kim, and most of those times I'm like, my goodness, how did you make it here? Because she's so busy. But the support from the association for the league has really made that relationship flourish and mesh the missions together. The other thing is, so you have timing where all symphonies are going through their challenges. All volunteer groups are going through their challenges. And as opposed to spiraling this way and that way, I believe what we've done is we've actually come closer together, which has made everything easier and more effective.
I think also, when it comes to volunteers, one of the things that we can do is that we help the volunteers understand that sometimes there's an expiration date on various projects that you're doing, because everything has to evolve and everything needs to continually be fresh. So if you've done the same gala for 25 years, you can still do the gala, but you may need to refresh how the gala is done, because everything will become stale after a while. And so as we all know, one of the things that we all hate to hear, but we hear it all the time, is we've done it this way forever. And so working to keep things fresh, so those projects which are very valuable, are remaining fresh and the public is enjoying them versus, after a while, no matter how wonderful it is, if it's the same thing, people are going to lose interest in them and the revenue is going to decline. And then one other thing that we were talking about earlier, fundraising we know is all about relationships. And one of the great things about volunteers, because volunteers are represented in so many parts of the community, you may also have that volunteer who may be the spouse of some corporate leader or this or that. So those volunteers are very helpful for you as an organization because they are also connected to various people in the community that you want to be able to have close to you. So the volunteers are absolutely crucial.
Well, generally, Robert, in the types of orchestras you've dealt with, have you found it easier or more difficult to collaborate with your league based on how many people are on your staff, how many people are in the league, that kind of influence?
I think some of it is I think it's sometimes more of a challenge when you're your own 501c3 because sometimes that volunteer group may also be raising money for other things beyond just the symphony. So that has its own challenges, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about that, but that has its own challenges. But I think if you have a good relationship with your league president, your guild president, whichever they're called, and that leadership has a relationship with the organization, you're usually in communication regularly, and we have found it very complimentary, that we all are working together, and that people will, I always laugh also is that one of the challenges also is no matter how many members, we have 365 members of our volunteer group. We know that basically 20% are the really active ones. And then so one of the challenges always is, I laugh, when the league board is being created each year, it's like, okay, we have the same people just taking different roles. And then so one of the challenges is constantly working to keep the league not to burn out, because if you have the same people and some of those people are getting older, and then so you are always going to have that challenge of keeping that league members motivated, because some of the people that are part of the league have not stepped up yet, and so some of the people, I have one of my league people is 92. She's amazing, but no, she's absolutely amazing, but I keep saying to myself, what are we going to do after she leaves? Not that we ever want her to leave, but it's one of those things that you have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, Ginger is a band director. How can she have time to be the president of a symphony guild? And not only that, but the person who was supposed to be president this year backed out. So she's serving again. And so I think Robert's right. You have to refresh, you have to find new volunteers, you have to encourage new folks to join, and it's very difficult. And maybe you could talk more about that, because I know it's a challenge for you.
I think for us, it's finding volunteers, especially post-COVID, and I think we've had discussions in different areas about how volunteerism has changed and what people are wanting to do, wanting to be involved in, how much time they're willing to give. It's a completely different ballgame now, and it was becoming challenging before COVID, and I think a new generation of volunteers, they're looking for something that tugs at the heartstrings, something that makes them feel good, and it's not the idea anymore, unfortunately, of what can I give, but what can I get, is they want something. I see a lot of head nods. That's there, but it's needing to get something out of it. If I'm going to give up my time and away from my family and away from all of these other things, the things that I'm passionate about in my personal life, speaking as a volunteer, I feel like it needs to be something that's worthwhile in some way, that has a value base for me. Like, I feel good about volunteering my time, and I think that's what our volunteers are wanting and craving. Something that they're either gaining a skill set that they can take out into into the workforce, learning how to serve on a board so that they can learn how to serve in other organizations in our community. Taking away, whether it's fellowship, getting together with other like-minded people to be able to serve in that capacity. But it's also in finding small ways that they can do things. I think I was talking to someone earlier this morning about the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But as volunteers, I think that there are some of us that are like, all right, well, there's not enough people, so I'm going to serve myself this gigantic piece. And what it needs to be is everybody has something small that they can contribute, something that they can do. So finding very task-oriented or very time-limited kind of volunteer jobs that people can do, and spreading that out, and not letting it be something that is maybe a year-long commitment where they have to come to a meeting every month, and they have to come to, and getting 75 hours and doing those things. For our league or our guild, that doesn't necessarily work. And I know there are several guilds out there that do, or leagues that do, you have an hours requirement. I think if we did that, we would completely disband. There would be no way that we would be able to function. But our volunteers that are there, if we have, hey, we need someone to serve on our lunch and listening committee, could you help to serve lunches to people this month? Or have 2 or 3 people that are a part of that committee that will tag team that. And so they're just doing that every other month, and so that's not as huge of a commitment, but they still are a part of it, and it still is something that is serving our symphony. So again, I think it's small areas that they can find ways to get plugged in. And then our big events like fundraising that we all know takes a year in advance or months in advance for some of our larger fundraisers. Finding those people that are really passionate about fundraising and getting them on board, and then they have friends. They have friends of friends of friends of friends, for us, is what we've found, and they seem to gather that and get that done. But that's a whole other animal that we can talk about later, the fundraising component.
I agree with that, but I also think that one of the challenges that the Symphony Association has is that it's a 1 year for the president and the board, and then they're gone. So you essentially have 9 months to get to know those people, get to cultivate who they know, and then the slate is wiped clean, and it starts all over again. So they're doing a great job of making sure that connections don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I must have been having a mind meld with you, because while you were saying that, I had been thinking, one of the great things about the staff, and one of the challenges they have, is they have to they're constant. They have to keep adapting to all different personalities. So this year, the chair of the event is someone different than last year. The president is different. We all have different styles and personalities, and they have to just keep smiling and adapt to all of them. And most of us are super nice and easy to work with, but the reality is, we have a short shelf life in our different roles.
One of the ways, I'm glad you said that. I actually have a meeting set up with our symphony liaison, and we're going to sit down and write out hey, this is what this job would be. This is what, a timeline, because that's not there. But here's a timeline. And I was like, that's an amazing, I've done that for other organizations. I do that in my job. Why am I not doing it for this? Duh. But having a timeline so that when my time is up, someone else has, this is exactly what you do in this month on this. This is what you need to be looking ahead for. This is what you plan. And I think we had that in our organization years ago, back when paper was the thing, and now it somehow is lost, so I'm not sure where that went. But I really do think that is critical. We're gonna sit down and go, okay, here is what your job, how you're working with us. This is how, if she ever, left or was put into a different position in the symphony, whoever took that role would need to know how what that interaction should be. So I think that's really critical.
Well, I was just going to say, excuse me, it's interesting in large symphonies that in some ways we oftentimes in the large symphonies are less effective in utilizing the volunteers and the energy and excitement of the volunteers, well, and I definitely saw that at my time in Boston. And as I mentioned, I was so thrilled when I came to Dallas and saw the efficiency and sort of like the really good management practices of the volunteers, which help us manage them better because they have their own good practices. And but I think a good point was brought up about the constant changing of volunteer leadership can create some challenges because you don't have the continuity of building. And in our work, we often get better with the more time we get to know people and know their work styles, and especially with so much activity going on. So I think that that's an interesting question to think about. Why I understand why recruiting volunteers, giving them a one-year job is a really good recruitment tool, but it may be something to think about for all of us in the future, that if there was a little bit more continuity, we all could potentially be more effective in managing the change.
Well, I think often volunteers find changes in management a little bit difficult to deal with. I think the culture changes from time to time when management changes, and I wonder how any of you might have, dealt with that when your own management leadership changes.
I just want to say this. I think the 1 year for a president is a good thing, because you can have a great one and want him for 5 years, and then you can have one that's not as great as that one, and so 1 year's fine. But
That was very diplomatic.
So all kinds of term limits.
Yeah, well, I had the good fortune to be on the search committee, so I was very excited when Robert came. But I think there's a feeling out period where you want to get to know and what's their style. But I think everyone, at least looking at Barbara Burvant, who's our current league president, and Ellsworth, our board chair, and I think everyone was excited, because we saw it as, where's the Madison Symphony, 2.0 or 3.0, where are we going? So we were excited for the change, and to see what someone new who was a veteran in the field but would bring different experiences. So I think
we were afraid of her.
We were not afraid of Robert.
Well,
He's a good smiler. Maybe we should have been afraid.
Kim
No.
came from Boston, and they did not have the volunteer model that we have. So we had thoughts in our head that she was going to come in and say, "Oh, get rid of that." And she came in, and instead she treated the league as if the league was one of their major patron donors, which consistently.
Which you are.
We are. So we were pleasantly surprised.
I'm glad I didn't scare you for very long.
I think every organization is different. In Madison, we're very fortunate that even the executive directors are usually there for 20 plus years. And then so we have not had the issue of constant change. I know in other organizations that I've been in, that's not been the case. And then so, especially for some of the smaller groups, when you have a person who's changing all the time, that could be very much of a challenge to not just the volunteers, but to the whole organization. And then so I understand the question. I do think that, that one needs to learn each other quickly. I'm not going to disagree with what she has to say, but I sort of think, not Janet, I'm speaking of her, but I think that having a volunteer president, if not all the officers for 2 years, is wonderful. It's like a board, I work with organizations where your board president changed every year also. That was completely disruptive to me. And so I think having a volunteer council, guild, or whatever it's called, for 2 years is a lovely thing, as with the board that are, for us, the boards actually could be up to 4 years. And then so I think that's what I would recommend, because it really does, it's true, by the time the year is over, they finally know what they're doing. And then so you don't want them also to have to step away, and then you have to start from scratch again.
Larry, do you have anything to add to the?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about a lot of positive things. There's sometimes some negative things too. So sometimes the tail wags the dog. So, for example, the Guild started the Symphony Ball, and many of us have a ball many, many years ago, and the goal was to raise money for the symphony. What a thought. And so last year, I mean, they had the most spectacular ball I've ever seen in my life. I was a colonel in the United States Air Force for almost 30 years. I served in Washington, D.C., and played at the White House and all across Washington, D.C. I went to dozens of balls, and this one was better. I mean, they spent a fortune on this ball, and the profit to the symphony was very small. And so Ginger and I are diligently working on reining that in, because things can get out of control. You can forget why you decided to work on this project, and it turns into something totally different. And so I think we all need to be careful of that.
You need a 50% rule. You need to have 50% more profit than you, or 80-20 is better,
Yeah,
but
it
at
was-
least 50%.
And I think one of the things that over the years, it sort of got away. We had some different executive director changes and some challenges, and I think that speaks to having that consistency. And there wasn't a good relationship previously with the Guild and the executive director and that staff. It was almost like they were butting heads, kind of like you said, Marena, like they felt like they were against each other or working not together. And so I think that started, you can see that financially where that trend began. And with Larry coming in, it's been such a different relationship that we have. It's so open, it's so much, very inclusive, and I think that makes a huge difference where he sees the value of what we do and the untapped potential of what our volunteer base is, and is trying to help us along the way, like to really do what we need to do to step it up. So we've kind of instituted, there's more involvement in the fundraising planning and marketing and donor base and all of that with the Symphony office, which puts a little bit more responsibility onto the very few members that we have in that office. But I think it's hopefully to reap a big financial reward there at the end. And so it's making a difference right now in our planning, like the planning of this next event. And we have 2 fundraising events this year. And it's making a big difference in the way that those people that are chairs of those events are looking at how they're going to be getting money and what that goal is, the ultimate goal. And I think that has a lot to do with this gentleman right here and his leadership and with what we're able to do.
So you're devising how to create a positive relationship with your executive director and how to coordinate and how to define the roles. Is there another interesting way to solve these challenges? Constructive.
Questions too from the audience.
We were going on to questions, and I just wondered if there was something.
I think also volunteers can be very helpful when it comes to, when you're looking at strategic planning, looking at other things, you want, sometimes I have felt over the years that, people think of the 3 things that are important, which is the musicians, the board, the staff, and the volunteers sometimes was more secondary. And then so making sure that the volunteers are a part of that versus being viewed as less important is something I think is very helpful, because sometimes the volunteers may be forgotten. They just feel like they're just volunteers. They're not really making the decisions. So like involving the members of the league into things in the strategic planning and on the different committees has been very helpful because there's value for them that they are being involved in the governance of the organization, not governance so much, but in the direction of the organization. And so I think those things can be done to improve versus just thinking of volunteers as somebody who's just going to plan a party or somebody who's just going to do a docent program, but to recognize that the volunteers are an integral part of your organization and should be treated as such.
So to build on what Robert just said, I think if we look at this philosophically, orchestras are working so hard to get the time of people, right? We want people to come to concerts. What are we asking them for? Money and time. And here we all have hundreds of people who are giving us money and time every day, every month, every year. And so we need to think of those people who are already committed and doing all of that as high up on the list of our priorities in our organizations. And if we think about it in that manner, I think that we can truly forge a meaningful relationship, because there's a mutual respect, and we can have honest conversations as well, because we know that the volunteers are very committed, more committed than 98% or 99% of the population in what we do. And I think that that's the thing that we always have to remember.
I have a question for the executive directors. Why do you think that some of the major symphonies are going away from volunteerism? I believe it was a trend maybe starting five to 8 years ago.
Taking it in-house?
Why is it, well, I don't know about in-house. Some have just, they don't have them anymore.
Yeah, because they say, we can do it like the Utah Symphony.
More efficiently.
Yeah, we
Is that
can
it?
just do it ourselves as the staff. Detroit Symphony, Baltimore, they've all sort of said.
Why do you
we
think
don't
that
need
is?
to, which seems silly.
Well, I guess y'all have a good,
I don't understand, but as we were talking about earlier, how integral those volunteers are, I would see that would not be something that I would recommend for an organization, because again, time, money, expertise, and as Kim absolutely was spot on when she said, those volunteers are, we're trying our best to try to reach more people, to bring more people, trying to raise more money. We already have this group of people
Totally committed to you.
who are totally committed, and they're being marginalized. And so that, I think that's unfortunate. I don't know. I know it's a challenge in this role at times when you're trying to, direct and manage, because if you have 300, 400, 700 people, 1,100, 1,400, there's a lot of people to manage. It's hard. It's a full-time job just to manage the board. And then, yes, I say that with my board president here.
How many board?
It's a full-time job, but then the volunteers and then the staff and all. It's a lot of work to be done, but that's what we're paid to do, to try to get all the people involved within the organization to make the organization run efficiently. So I don't understand that the thought of people just getting rid of the volunteers. I do know that with my staff now, I have to have the staff more involved with the volunteers, because it's hard to find someone for your fundraiser. Well, who wants to be the sponsorship chair? That's the one that you always have the hardest time getting. Our silent auction, our live auctions, and so I would involve my staff with that, and the staff members. It's a fine line. Some of them are really happy now that they are involved in these things, so they know that what it's being directed to and how. But then some are always at the same time they're saying, "This was never my job," and then so that is a fine line that you have to dance. But I find it to be quite healthy. Again, with the marketing team to be dealing with the brand, so whatever images are being created, it's being consistent with what we wanted to be done. So I find it to be healthy that the staff and the league are working closer together. The league now knows every staff member. It's not just the executive director. They know all of the staff. We're smaller. We're a $5.5 million group, and so they know all of us. And so I find it to be very healthy.
That sounds like it's workable for you and workable for any group that tries to make the communication complete. And we would like to hear from the audience with questions that can be directed.
There's a microphone
there in the middle. Maybe he will.
Bruce will hand it.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
He's
he's the microphone man.
Yeah.
The Wrangler.
A microphone wrangler.
You guys are talking about being a small group. We're a group 7, so we're much smaller. And we're totally board run. We do have an executive director. We have 2 staff members, executive director and an admin assistant. Our volunteer group that was run by a member of the board and was pretty much obliterated. So my question is, how do I build that back up?
Well, I'm not a big, well, I understand you have to do what you have to do, but I think of volunteers as, volunteers should be volunteers and not necessarily the governance of the organization. And then so trying to get the organization structure so that the board members are doing their role, which is to govern, and not, I don't really like to necessarily, I know I've been to small orchestras before, to have board members who are actually doing the jobs. But they really are to be governing the organization more so than trying to do every aspect of the staff member. I understand with the smaller staff, but you know, try to find ways to create a better structure so that it's not just, the board members won't do what they really need to do if they're doing all the other tasks that you're asking the board members to do. Because trust me, it's easier to manage than it is to govern.
But you might draw on your board members for ideas and say, who do you know that just, you know, really loves the symphony, that maybe you can make an introduction, you know, they come all the time, and set up, facilitate a coffee, and you sort of recruit someone, but use your board member to make help you make a connection. They know people, they know who comes, so maybe there's someone out there, you just don't know them, that attends your symphonies, that might be willing, but you need that sort of introduction. So maybe use your board members to create a connection. But then it's relationships. It's like anything. You're going to have to go ask. If you just put up on your website who wants to volunteer, you know, no one raises their hand. But if someone comes to you and says, Barbara, oh, would you like to be president? Yeah, you hadn't thought about it. So, but you know what I mean? The same thing with recruiting someone. Would you like to be our liaison and build back our volunteers? And that's one thing I would do, is leverage the resources you have for ideas.
And as you're leveraging those resources, really take into account what those people are going to be doing, because no one wants to sign up for something that they don't know what it is. So maybe having the board really come up with what that structure is, what is it that you need volunteers to do, and then you're looking for a very specific person or type of person or someone who's wanting to do a specific type of job to get started back up. And I think that'll help, maybe that will help.
Yeah, because sometimes too, you're right, you get someone to do a role, and then once they get involved, then they do more. We laugh. It's like the volunteer. You sort of pull people in, and before you know it, you know, you're first just volunteering to, you know, brainstorm an idea, and the next thing you know, oh, could you be the chair of this committee? The next thing you know, so once you get someone involved in one little thing, then it may blossom and I think happen more organically, because that's the challenge. You can't sort of impose it. It has to come more organically.
Hi, thank you for this great presentation, and nice to see Robert and Janet, fellow Madisonian. Yay, Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra and Madison Symphony. My question is, if I give you a magic wand and you could change or keep the best and maybe the not so great things about your current volunteer group with no consequences, what would those be?
I'll let my colleagues answer that first.
I mean, I think what I would like to see is an expansion of the group into younger and more diverse volunteers, because I think that's one of the challenges. Naturally, people who have time are the most available, and so that creates some barriers in and of itself. But it would be great if we could find a way on a significant level, not just in a, here and there, to be able to attract a wider group of people that really want to get involved with us on a volunteerism level.
And I think you made that known, and they've made some strides in the last year. So her magic wand, she'll get what she wants. So
I think one thing I would probably do is, for the super volunteers who are already part of your core, for them to be able to understand and embrace the new wave of volunteers, because some volunteers come in and they are full-time employees of some other organization, and so their time is very limited. They're not like the volunteers who are only focused on one organization. And then so they're not able to come to the meetings and to the coffees all the time, and there are a lot more things going to have to be done by Zoom or whatever the case may be. And so sometimes those newer volunteers don't necessarily feel like they are accepted, because it's different than the staunch volunteers. We've been part of this volunteer group for 30 years, and we know how it's supposed to be done. So sometimes I think that would be helpful if the existing volunteer base could understand that things are changing and that we have to embrace this next wave of volunteerism, and that even though the person may not be exactly like them, that they can bring value to the organization and to the project, and that they should not have to feel like they should run off a person. And even if the person was responsible for something, that person was not perfect in their job, that there is a lot more grace extended to that individual, because I know when the people who go to the concert for the very first time, they feel that stare and they glare at people. And so that happens in volunteerism too, that, you know, that new wave, if that could be a lot more of, we love you, we want you to be involved, and then eventually, hopefully, they will be able to give more time and more efforts and more energy and funds to the project. But I guess that's what I would say, one of the things I would do.
And to build on what Robert said, if I was waving a magic wand for my fellow volunteers, I would say, let go. It's not your, people get very fiercely attached to something, and they start to think that if there's any change to it, it's somehow an attack on them, or it's, you haven't done a good job. It's like, let it go. Mentor the next person, say, you know what, I enjoy doing this, but let it go, because people get very proprietary about their projects, and then they don't want to change, they don't want to listen, and it becomes like their little fiefdom. So for my fellow volunteers, it's like, let go, bring someone else on and pay it forward, but let go.
Yeah, that's a theme from Frozen.
I think so, and I don't even sing or watch Frozen, but yes, let it go. Go. So yeah, sorry to put that little earworm in.
Another question. So my question is in regards to leveraging a volunteer chorus into the fold of a volunteer guild. And these are individuals that are rehearsing every week, they're very committed, but how would you think about leveraging a volunteer chorus to bring them into more like a guild or a league in that manner, really as volunteers and with a voice?
Does your chorus have like a leader, a president, a chair?
Not currently, but it is sort of just sinking it. We just have 80 people that are out in the community with different jobs and different connections, and how do we take that leverage when we come into a volunteer core of like an ambassadors group, a guild, or a league?
First, make sure the chorus is part of the table. So a chorus person should be involved in the board, the league in some capacity, official capacity. So they have to be part of the table to feel like they are really meant to be there versus just they just was asked to just join it. So the chorus has to be part of that, and then find roles for members of the chorus to get involved in. Because again, chorus, they also have such different skill sets. All the members are all different. So find a role for them. Everyone always says, as I said, there's always this blanket announcement, please join, become a volunteer. But sometimes it really has to be a lot more strategic, and really going to the chorus and speaking with the chorus and spending time with the chorus and finding out what various people can do to have them then become volunteers, because many of them are not going to necessarily come until they are personally approached and brought into the fold, more so than thinking they're just going to respond to a posting or an email.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a terrific idea. We tend to treat our volunteer chorus more like an extension of staff. So we communicate with them as we do the staff, keeping them informed and trying to offer benefits in that way. But I think that you bring up a really good point, that if that group were made aware of the various volunteer activities beyond their contribution artistically, certainly some of them would be interested and willing, and we've just really never highlighted that part of our work with them. So I think that that's a really a fascinating idea, and something that probably a lot of us in this room will think about taking back to our orchestras.
You mentioned orchestras are moving away from volunteering or utilizing volunteers. And I'm personally in a situation where we have some volunteers that may not necessarily want to, work with the board or work with the committee. They want to do like low level of volunteering, not necessarily the orchestra, but actually our chorus. We have a few people that really want to volunteer and they want to feel like a part of something, but we don't have like anything in particular for them to do. What would your argument be for utilizing volunteers rather than the kind of looking for...
Find something for them. Find something, anything, whether it's stuffing mailers or making copies or sending out something that, one, they can't hurt or damage your organization, because they're not you all know, so that it's not something that is vital, because they're not fully invested yet. You're trying to garner that investment. You're trying to get that investment into that organization, and they don't know exactly what's going on within your organization just yet. So giving them, since they want to be a low-level volunteer, some of those jobs that maybe the staff is not could pass along to them so that they could get in the office, and then you start building those relationships with the staff. They start hearing the different needs that there are of the organization, and maybe there are some different ideas that can develop, like Janet said, organically, where once you start volunteering and you start getting in there, then you get that bug and you just kind of keep going, and that just sort of facilitates into something bigger. So maybe
I would just say, start with asking, have a conversation, invite let's say you've got the two people that really want to keep doing something, invite them out for coffee and say, let's brainstorm together, the three of us. What are the kind of things you like to do? Let me tell you maybe where we have needs, and have an open discussion about it. I mean, don't try to read their mind and figure out what they want to do. Don't let them come to you and suggest something that then it's awkward to say, yeah, I don't really need you and want you doing that. So I would just say, get together over coffee, buy them a sandwich, whatever, but make it informal, not across a desk, and just brainstorm. Here's the kind of things we maybe could use help with. What are your skills? How could we get involved? Let's set expectations. So much of all of this stuff is communication. We're always afraid to be sometimes honest in the nicest way, to define expectations and to ask. People love to be asked about their opinions and their thoughts of how they could contribute. That doesn't mean you have to just say, oh yeah, you want to do that, you can do it. So that's my 2 cents or 5 cents or 10.
I'm Paula McReynolds with the Waco Symphony, and I want to go back to the question earlier about refreshing fundraising events. Thank you for saying that. But one thing I wanted to ask about is how do you take a board's development plan, if your boards do have a development plan, and connect that back to the volunteer organization to set even more specific expectations?
My first response is, why wouldn't the volunteers be part of that development plan in the first place? Because volunteerism is a lot about raising the funds. So if that's not the case, plans are plans. Plans can be updated. Plans can be corrected and revised. And then so you need to have conversations with the volunteers and the development folk to figure out if that plan needs to change. Because the volunteers bring a lot. And then so that may be something that I would recommend, is to look into that plan and to see how the volunteerism can be included in that so that the plan can be revised.
Yeah, our guild is absolutely part of our development plan. I mean, there's a line on the budget, guild support, so much money, we depend on it. So we work with them very carefully to make sure we're doing things together that are going to bring in that income and helping them think of new ways to refresh, as you say, Robert, because so we do a vintage wine event every couple of years with the guild, and that's been very successful. But, you know, this year we're thinking about adding whiskey. You know, why not? People like whiskey. We might even add beer. You know, because obviously each of those has a different demographic. And so we want, you know, maybe that'll be a good idea. We're talking about how we might do that. And so this is one way to refresh that event.
We actually, Larry mentioned that they're going to be celebrating their 100th next year, is it? We're going to be celebrating 100 in 25, 26. But even in all of that planning, we're involving our league in that planning, because there's going to be some activities that may happen only that 1 year, and there may be some activities that will continue on for a while. But you want to make sure that even in things like that, you're bringing your volunteers into that, because you want to have a celebratory season, but you also want to create that structure for some things into the future. And so we're bringing our volunteers. It's not just about us creating events. We want to make sure that we're manning those activities and that the volunteers are having their voice into some of those things, because they may say, oh, you know, you want to now change the gala to something completely different. We want to make sure they're buying into all of these things and that they feel comfortable with it. Or if they could say, no, we won't recommend that, that's very important for us to know. So make sure you're involving them. As I said, there's a whole strategic planning, including them in the process.
Collaboratively.
Collaboratively, yes.
We have a guild that doesn't raise much money for the organization. And Robert knows this.
Oh, do I know it so well.
And I want to work with the guild this summer to change that. How would you do that? What would you recommend we do as an organization to try to change our guild's focus so that it is more of a fundraising group and less a service group?
Well, one thing that just comes to mind is, are you the board chair?
No, I'm sorry.
You're the, is that? Oh, he took over for Robert. Oh, big shoes. Big shoes.
I offered him his job back yesterday.
You know, we're not giving it.
And I respectfully declined, too.
Yeah, Robert went on AccuWeather and saw the temperature. He's like, nah, I'm not leaving Madison. Seriously, I would say one thing would just do what I would call like a top-to-top meeting. Meet one-on-one with whoever is the president of your guild, and just start having the conversation. How can here's where I'd love to go. How can you help us? You know, so create that real relationship so she or he has bought into it together, and then you can each go back to your respective staffs, board members, the league, or, you know, members, and get buy-in. But I think this one, to make that kind of change, you need to start top to top. That's at least how I would approach it.
Yeah, go back and say that it's all our idea, that it just dawned on you at a conference.
Yeah.
So that they don't feel like you're asking them to raise money because it's you wanting them, but yes.
You learned it.
I think starting small, so that it's not something that is a huge, overwhelming thing, but a small fundraising idea, something that maybe can turn into something bigger. I don't know what that would be in your community, but starting something small that's manageable by a small group of people that maybe don't have a ton of fundraising experience, but they're going to need to be guided in how to do that by the board and maybe trained in what that would look like with marketing and setting a budget and that sort of thing, if that's something that they're not familiar with doing.
I think the other thing is making it known that you need their help in that way. Because I think that people respond to, I really need you to help us raise money. Could we start with a plan? And what are your ideas? I have a couple, let's discuss it. But to be needed changes the whole motivation, I think, for volunteers.
I think it's about the why. Once people understand the why that you need their help in this way, it's easier to get them on board. When you've told this, you've created the story. I don't know, we were in a meeting the other day, someone said, it's the why, it's the story behind it. It's the, when you're raising money and you have the picture of, I think it was the Pittsburgh Symphony Education Director said, when you know about who you're raising money for, the why, so create it in a story that is compelling.
Well, historically, that's why leagues were created. League management in the 50s sent governance people home to their communities and urged them to create leagues that would raise money to help serve the needs of the orchestra.
Two other things I will add. I'm sorry, Larry. Two other things I would add is maybe having some members of that league come and get involved with this to understand what others are doing. Because sometimes when you're only in your community and you only know what you're doing, you think that that's all that there is. And so bring them in this environment, they can see what others are doing, and no matter what their budget size. And the other thing is sometimes speaking in their language. One of the things I know this league will always say, we can't find new members. We all have the same people. Well, because of the way that they're operating, they're not going to get many new members because they just want to be an organization who house receptions. That's more of what they prefer to be. And so to help them understand, if you wish to get new members, if you wish to bring more vitality, these are the various things that can be done to create that energy. I wasn't successful in doing that there because I had other priorities, but that's something that I have in my mind that help them understand sometimes in their language. Go ahead, Larry.
Greg, I would just say we'd be happy to help too. I mean, you could call us, you could call Ginger. We'd be glad to talk to your guild and league people. I think his idea is good too. You need to probably refresh and bring in some new people too. It could be that you need new blood, and that's sometimes challenging. If you know somebody that wants to volunteer, or you have someone in mind that you'd like to see be part of your organization, you might ask them to start getting, because it really just starts with one person sometimes that can really energize everybody else. I know what you mean. I had a guild in Flagstaff when I was there. All they wanted to do was play bridge. And they were just lovely people, and they brought in a little bit of money every year, but really it was a social club. And getting them to change was very, very challenging. So I created a couple of events myself, some fundraising events, and asked them to volunteer with that, and that was helpful. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Caroline Eberhard. I'm from the Canton Symphony Orchestra. We're a fellow Group 5 orchestra, and I was wondering, you said that with volunteers you can't have an hour requirement because you'll lose your volunteer base. And I was wondering, with volunteers being so busy having full-time jobs and other things going on the side, what do you do to honor the hours they have served so that they want to come back and they feel like they're contributing?
We do something within our guild where we honor members that have who is like a top member or somebody who is like the member of the year, or we also do member spotlights in our newsletter, and so we try to find those members that have done something over and beyond and spotlight them and showcase them in our newsletter and put them online and things like that. So finding ways to recognize them publicly and recognize them even one-on-one, where I'll give them a call, write a handwritten note goes a long ways these days, like just something that actually goes through the actual post office mail with a stamp, you know, where it really does go a long way to do that, and it's not difficult to do, and it's something that makes you feel good and recognized because someone took, like you had said, it's about time. They took their time to thank you and to do that. So we try to find ways to recognize those members for that, for their service, and doing that publicly. If it's at an event, thanking the people, obviously, like we all do. Thank you to the sponsors and the people that have helped. And if you are part of that committee, please stand so we can recognize you. Those little things throughout the year.
I'm not a fan of the hours requirement. It's putting the cart before the horse in my mind, but I'm just opinionated. Yeah.
That's why I like Marena, because I'm opinionated too. But I agree. I agree. I think when you have the hours requirement, this is how I would feel, then it starts to be like a job. And when it's a job, then you start to get resentful. It's like, well, I'm doing this, I'm not getting paid. You know, I used to work, if you're retired, you're thinking, I used to work for a living, and they paid me a lot to do this. Like, yeah, it creates a bad cycle, but you can still acknowledge someone's time and say, yeah, top volunteer, you know, they've been on this committee, they've served, you know, and this was a huge project that took months. I know a lot of orchestras are looking to not have printed programs, but you still have a program, whether it's a QR code, is also recognize your volunteers in your program at the end of the year. Just say a volunteer appreciation. These, you know, orchestra supporters served on committees. Everyone, when people say, oh, you don't need to thank me, no, that means thank me, thank me, thank me. Yeah, that's what they're really saying. So never miss an opportunity to leverage your assets to, whether it's on Facebook, we all have Facebook pages, or Instagram. I mean, both the symphonies and the leagues. So acknowledge people that way. Use your resources.
I think that's a good point. And another way that we can acknowledge is through inviting volunteers to events we're already having. So it's not a special event, but there's an event that we're having that it would be fine to have another 20 people or 30 people, invite the volunteers, and then thank them at that event. Oh, and by the way, this evening we have our volunteer group here. Raise your hands. I cannot be transactional. That's the problem with hours. It becomes transactional. And if you want a relationship, it is not a transaction.
And, do you have your organization has hours? Does your
really tracked in a way that we have to have them meet that quota. So
okay, because
very highly suggested, but at the same time we're dealing with some rules that have been in place for a very long time.
right. Because I'm on the volunteer council, and a few years ago we had a submission for one of our awards, I believe it was, and what it was a party that recognized the people who actually volunteered. You know, it was at a special home, and, you know, so that they closed invitation, so to speak. But if you have people in your organization who are because we don't have hours in our organization, but we definitely have certain people who do a lot of volunteering. And so it was just something that a luncheon or an afternoon of wine and cheese that they were invited to because they had actually volunteered.
Charlotte, that was actually our Madison Symphony League, so I'm happy to tell you about our event.
Please do.
Yeah, I'll meet up with you.
Hi, my question, and I'd like to hear from the executive. Okay, like to hear from the executive directors. Our group has been told that that the orchestra would like us to change our focus from fundraising, which is what we have historically done. Sometimes for many years, our fundraising was integral to the bottom line. But now we're told that they'd like us not at all on fundraising, but on subscriptions, patron development. And we're kind of at a loss here because we haven't been given much guidance about how we're supposed to go about doing that. There hasn't been any offer of assistance or collaboration in terms of how we're supposed to do that, but we've actually been given quite a large assignment in terms of the numbers. And I'm just interested in your thoughts about that and how you would handle a situation like that.
Well, I say if you want to still fundraise, we have an organization in Madison, Wisconsin that we would welcome you. So everybody in your group, that will be gladly accept them. I think they are both. They work together, as we all know. Audience engagement. The ones who are more engaged, of course, will be the ones who are more likely to become donors. And so you have to maybe help the organization understand they really are interrelated, and that it's not like it's just one versus the other, because you need to have the fundraising still. I mean, I'm just having a hard time imagining someone saying, do not worry about fundraising. Never have heard that in my life. Yeah, I mean, you guys are in such a wonderful position that fundraising is not an issue. But still, I think fundraising is absolutely crucial. But audience engagement is also very important. Everybody's trying to build back audiences, and everybody's trying to get an audience to grow. So it could be the combination of the two things that need to be done more so than it is just one or the other.
I mean, all I can say is you all would have a very special connection with lapsed subscribers or people who attend frequently to be able to have a conversation or a dialogue. Those subscribers and those individuals would feel very special. So I'm imagining that that's the psychology of it, because think about telemarketing that's done, the commercial telemarketing. It's so impersonal, it's so off-putting, it's so negative, and I'm giving the positive spin that I do believe that the group that you work with could have an incredible impact. I don't think it's an easy task, but I think that your relationship with people as a peer is probably what they're thinking about, and I imagine that you all would do a far better job than a lot of other who could be assigned to that, even staff members, just because of the nature of it.
I have to say that the sense that we get is that the organization does not want to devote staff time to assist with the...
Oh, they don't want staff.
The organization doesn't want to devote staff hours to assist with the implementation of the fundraiser. And so they want us to now redirect our focus to selling subscriptions. Yeah. And it's just really taken us aback. And the reason why I pose this question is because I'm a member of the Volunteer Council, and I've talked to a number of other fellow members and just people that I've met throughout the course of this conference. And this is not an unusual situation. I mean, I know we haven't heard a lot about it in the room, but this is what's happening out here. And this is one of the reasons why we proposed this forum and this dialogue. And I really appreciate the effort, the time that you put into answering our questions.
Right here.
I got one back
here. Oh, you have
first.
one back there. Okay, well, we're about to need to wind up, so why don't you go back to that?
Okay, I was wondering how much time we want to go over.
It's close, but I think the gentleman here has something to say after your person.
I just want to put a pitch in for involving the musicians. We had a musician on our board, and she brought in so much to the volunteer group. Anytime we had an idea, she's like, oh, I can get you someone to play for that, or why don't we use these musicians and do that? So, and people would love to go to events. The volunteers would love to go to events where they could mingle with the musicians. And so don't discount that.
To that point, I'm actually both. I'm on the board and I'm a musician.
I just think the one thing that's been passed over sometimes is dialogue of the dialogue. Listen to the volunteers. They may have very creative ideas about solving your problems too. Don't just go to them and say, we need you to do this, but how would you help us handle that? In a way
Excellent,
that makes their
positive.
contribution more valuable. I think that's essential to making this work. Is feeling like
Indeed.
you're wanted as a volunteer, not just an employee or a gopher or whatever.
I don't think any of us up here, many of the volunteers, take the position of we just tell the volunteer council what they have to do. We really work it together as a team. We may have our thoughts and ideas. We go to the volunteer chair and we talk about it. And it's never a situation of us just saying, your budget is X amount for the year, go out and raise that money. We really work together.
Well, thank you all for participating this morning, and each of you from your different perspectives and your different locations outside of Texas as well.